Hi everyone, I'm Simon, nice to meet you. And welcome to my talk on Advanced Common Sense 101 for the actual title, How to Improve Your Product's Usability. I want to buy some solar panels for my new Austrian home. I'm a volunteer that doesn't speak German, please. Yeah, come on.
Oh no. Do you have to step into the front?
Yeah, please do. Right, so this is Halason. You might have heard it, but it's a Austrian solar panel selling website. Can you please do your best to try and get me set up with some solar panels? And just sort of talk me through. No cheating. Just sort of figuring it out based on whatever
Intuition.
context, please. Yeah.
So
I was on this project.
I was on this project. Actually designed some of this.
Well, some of it's changed.
Yeah. Okay, so I guess I'm trying to figure out like the best way that I can go and buy solar panels, right?
Yep.
So I suspect the big yellow button in the middle of the page is my best bet.
That's a good intuition.
Okay, we click there.
Mm-hmm.
So given the icon with the house, I'm assuming I need to like put my address in here.
Sure, I can give you that.
Cool. And then again, the big yellow button is now enabled, so I think I can press to the next step.
Yeah, right?
And then I get a map.
Oh, there we go.
Cool. So at this stage, I'm kind of confused at what I'm meant to do because I see like 4 dots on a map. I'm gonna pretend like I don't know what this does, but
Okay.
do I like, okay, I can move it around. Do I put it on top of my house?
Seems reasonable.
Yeah. Let's move on. No clue what that's saying.
Yeah.
I like the first one, it sounds funner. Okay, like this is pretty understandable. Like what type of roofing do I have? Stop me when you want me to stop.
No, that's fine. I'll stop you before I have to pay.
I can pay for it. So I like the fact that obviously there's like degrees here and like the images really help. So I guess flat is flat. This is something in between and this is like pretty slanted. Let's go for slanted.
Mm-hmm.
Assuming that I can kind of anglify this. How many people live in your house?
Yeah.
How many people normally something? All right, let's just say. There we go. And it's calculating like a certain amount of kilowatt hours per year. But I guess I could like modify this and say I actually want to do like 7,000. I know how many kilowatt hours I have.
Perfect.
Cool. Electric charger
Pretty much.
for like a car.
Battery.
Okay. Certain times of the, yeah, when you can install it,
Yes.
and then you're asking me to pay that.
Last step. What does this do?
So it's an adjustment based off of months to how much the price is going to be. So you get like a calculator. Oh, that's what it's like. So this is confusing
Yeah.
because you've got a status and this one's actually adjustable. So like they look identical. Anyway, yeah, I guess it tells you like what your monthly payments are going to be and your upfront payment is going to be and how many months you want to spend with it.
Not quite. What do you think this number represents if it's not months? And if it's affecting the price that you're paying?
So it's not a time-based thing.
No.
The number of solar panels?
Bingo. All right. You can leave it there. Thank you very much. Okay, so that was a usability test for a very weird use case. Normally, you'd be able to do the usability test in a language you speak. And this is typically a process that is done by a usability expert or sometimes a usability consultant. And the process is take your product, the one you're developing right now, try and follow one of the user journeys, or like doing what users are typically going to be doing on the product. Note where you get stuck in the process, somewhere like confusing, or even better, someone who's not familiar with it, get them to go through and see where they get stuck. So an example would be the sort of the step that just had the text options. That was selecting if you own the house or if you rent the house. And then at the end of this, you have a meeting to discuss your findings and then figure out how to fix them. Bad news, you probably don't have a usability expert, and even if you do, they might be like quite late on in the process, like QA stages, and they might not cover everything. Therefore, it is quite useful for anyone on your team to sort of be aware of these principles, so you can bring it up in ticket refinement quite early on, to sort of reduce back and forth between designers and developers later on, and sort of prevent future complaints from users coming through. Thankfully, for the most part, a lot of these usability principles you're probably already aware of. They're sort of common sense, hence the title. But you might not realise them specifically until they're pointed out to you. It's more like a feeling that you've picked up. Also, take everything I say with a grain of salt. Not every sort of rule or guideline applies to every project, but they're still good to have in mind. So let's start off, what is usability anyway? Here's a bunch of different keywords that sort of make up the idea of a usable product, or even a usable feature. Is it useful? Does it do something that people actually need done? Learnable, can people figure out how to use it? Memorable, if they've learned it already, do they need to relearn it the next time they come around? Effective, does it do the job? Efficient, does it do the job with a reasonable amount of time or effort? Is it desirable? Do people actually want the feature? And is it delightful? Is using it fun? Which might be the most important one. Or probably a more useful summary, a person of average ability can figure out how to use it to accomplish something without it being more trouble than it's worth. Okay, so usability principle number 1. Don't make me think. This is probably the most important usability rule and is probably the basis for this entire talk. This is most of the findings from this talk are based off the book Don't Make Me Think by Steve Krug. We have it in the library, I think Rohan's got it at the moment, but I highly recommend it. There it is. That's prepared. The idea is, when you're looking at a page, everything should be self-evident. You should be able to get it, which is understand what it is, how to use it, without expending any sort of mental effort in thinking about it. So yeah, you can do everything you need to do on the site purely through common sense, without need of instructions. You want to avoid a thought process when you're going through a website that's filled with questions. So an example from the Zara website up here. I don't know if you can spot that, but that's kind of the point. You really enter the page and it's like, where's the navigation? There is a tiny hamburger in the top left. It's really hard to see against the background. There's also the questions of is this clickable? The background is clickable sometimes. There's, you might not spot them as well, but there's arrows very far on the left and right that sort of navigate between different pages. And these backgrounds, sometimes they're clickable, they take you to a new page. Sometimes it opens up the nav bar for whatever reason. And other times it's completely not clickable. And we have another example that actually bothered me 6 months ago. I was trying to get a desk for my living room for working from home on. Wasn't entirely sure, a desk for doing work on, is that furniture? Is it working from home? Is it going to be in both of those? Am I going to miss some things going into one? Even if it's a small question like that, every sort of hesitation or confusion or distraction adds up. Here's a better example. There. So the user's thought process on this footwear website would be, I want to go buy some shoes. There's a nav bar clearly presented at the top, it's easy to find. Let's go to the men's section. This brings down this drop down. I'm looking for footwear. I'm going to go there, click all footwear, that's it. Everything sort of makes sense going from one step to the other without having to really think about what you're doing. This sort of idea doesn't just apply for overall layouts. Every small design choice can make users think more or less. So each of these could feasibly be like a button or a link that on your Apple website. But I think you'll agree that the left one is much more obvious that it's an interactable element than the right one. There's nothing stopping the right one from being a link, but there's no sort of clues for you to figure it out. Anyway, rather than this being a sort of strict design checklist, try to just eliminate anything that might cause you to ask a question. Think about what's going to make you or a potential user lost or confused in your apps. So we said about making things self-evident, requiring no sort of explanation, but that's not always possible. If you're trying something original or something inherently complicated, you can't make everything self-evident. So self-explanatory is a much more reasonable goal, where it takes just a little bit of thought to get it. So I think the Halason demo at the start was closer to being self-explanatory. The clues. It might have been self-evident if you spoke German. So why bother with this? These sort of like reducing the questions the user asks throughout the process makes using the app feel more effortless rather than taking up their energy, detail, and time. And this positive experience means they're more likely to come back in the future and recommend it to other people. Other usability principles. People aren't actually going to read everything on your page, so they're not going to expect every component to decide this is the best action I want to take and then go with that. People scan. They sort of skim through, find at a glance what's most important to them, and then go for it. They usually got their objective in mind, they want it done quickly. There's a lot of stuff that they don't actually care about on the page, and people are good at it. I mean, you use scanning in every sort of reading, not just online, but maybe like a newspaper. You're more likely to pay attention to like words or phrases that match whatever you're looking for, anything that's a personal interest to you, or any kind of quick reaction words like sale or free or your own name. So with this in mind, rather than sort of like designing something like a book or even a leaflet, you're actually designing a billboard. Something that can be understood in an instant as you drive past without needing so much energy or thought as to distract you from driving, hopefully. So how do we design a billboard? You need to, well, one idea for designing billboards is to make good use of conventions. Things that are used across the web and other services that are easy to understand in a hurry. The example I've got up here is you can pretty much always understand what a stop sign is, even if you're not familiar with the exact layout in other countries, just because they tend to have the same sort of shape, position on the road, colors. So some examples for the web. We have where things are located in the page. Your logo is typically in the top left. You've got the navigation across the top. Even icons are pretty standardized across the web. You've got the magnifying glass for search and just a person's head for logging in. Of course, if you're a designer, you often don't want to just stick to using conventions. You want to innovate and come up with something new and interesting. But you really need to understand why the convention works the way it does before you do that. Make sure if you're replacing a convention, it's either clear enough and self-explanatory, there's no learning curve, or that it adds enough value to the user that the learning curve is worth it. Make it obvious what's interactable. So there's visual clues, like we discussed with the button example earlier, about what's clickable. On Letterbox here, as you can see, there's the hints that you're able to scroll and see more movies just by that movie on the end being cut off, even without any sort of like progress bar. You also want to keep it largely consistent. Make sure your links tend to have the same color and try not to share the color with non-clickable text. The example I have here is from the theatre website, where on its own, it's not really clear that these are clickable. They have the same color text and the difference in thickness isn't that significant. But given its position on the page, being right at the footer, you would expect to find links there, so it's not that bad. Creating visual hierarchies. Make sure the more important components are more prominent on the page. It's easier to like scan through and find the bit you're looking for, and if you're looking for what's typically more important, you want it to be bigger. Not just bigger, but like also bolder, more prominent. Also, make sure that objects that are close by to each other are related to each other. So you can have objects nested within each other to suggest that they're sort of linked. So an example of this is in these cards, you can tell that each of these is related to their specific product just because of the name, entertainment, they're all enclosed in one sort of parent component. You want to, in order to help people scan through your billboard, you want to get rid of as much visual noise as possible. So the example here is shouting, with everything on your page is trying to grab your attention at once. Like vary colors, fonts, animations, often adverts on the page. You want to find what's actually important for the user and prioritize that. Get rid of what's, like minimize like using different colors and fonts. You want to keep it maybe to like 2 or 3 if you can. Disorganization, it's distracting if things aren't properly aligned on an Apple website and it's harder to sort of navigate. If everything's in more of a grid layout, it's easier for you to find what you're looking for. This is probably a mean sort of resolution to look at the theatre website. I think it just breaks at this breakpoint, but I decided to include it anyway. Get rid of clutter. I don't like the eBay website. I think there's way too much information on the page at any given time. The theory with like getting rid of clutter on a page is you're much more likely to read emails if you've only got 7 new ones than if you've got an inbox with 1,000 backs up. Decide what's actually important to your product. What's everything that's essential to your product, get rid of everything else. This doesn't mean leaving a bare bones, boring design product. Like looking good can be an essential requirement for you. In terms of text-specific stuff, because I think probably half of what you're seeing on any Apple website is text, format your text to support scanning. Big sort of walls of text like this discourage people from reading through. So you can do this by utilizing headings. They're good to identify sections at a glance. And yep.
Prize.
Yeah, sure.
Oh yeah, thank you.
Rob spotted the line where it said, if you've read up to this point, the first person to interrupt me talking will receive some form of prize. But it's very buried in there, it's not very well formatted. I wish it had a nicer looking page. So, utilize headings. They're good for identifying sections and subjects to each other glance. Make sure there's more than just text size to differentiate between heading types. Because it's hard to tell them apart even if it's like, you get the point. If they're just varying in size. And also make sure they're closer to the section that they're introducing than the one before it. Make sure there's a bigger gap above it than there is below. Keep your paragraphs short. No one wants to read a wall of words. It's harder to scan. And web paragraphs are very different to essay paragraphs. You don't need this introduction, topic, detail, and conclusion. Online, even a single sentence paragraph is fine. If a paragraph is too long, break it in half. Repeat that until there's nothing that's too long. Use bulleted lists. If something can be bullet points, it probably should be. Find any paragraphs or sentences with lots of items separated by commas and turn it into bullet points. And also highlight key terms. Most people scan through to find what's important to them. If you are making this even clearer by underlining or making it italicized, then it's easier for them to do this. Don't overdo this though. If everything's sort of like brought out as more important, then it's hard to actually find what's useful. Here's a poor example of this. Since I brought up the theatre website a couple of times, I thought it was only fair to bring up this website I found for a student radio website designed by me. Yeah, no one's actually going to bother reading through that. In terms of the actual words you have, you need to get proficient with the art of not writing for the web. Get rid of half of the words you have on each page, and then get rid of half of what's left. This is actually less excessive than it might sound. Be as ruthless as you can without losing anything of value. The benefits of this, you reduce the visual noise on the page, like we discussed. It makes what's actually useful more prominent. It makes the pages shorter, so you can see more of your site at a glance. And obviously, this doesn't apply to things like articles or blog posts. You don't want to trim down actually written information. Get rid of happy talk. The sort of introductory text on a website, which is a hello, welcome to my website, back and go. It's not useful. If it's not helping the user achieve one of their goals, you can get rid of it. And lastly, instructions must also die. Imagine your dad assembling IKEA furniture. He's not actually going to bother looking at the instructions until he tries building it without them, and he's only going to go back to them if he fails. So if you've got this big set of instructions before a user tries to do something, they're not going to read it, especially if they're wordy, and even if they go back to it and try to find the part where they're stuck, it's going to be harder for them if they're it's too long. Anyway, in summary, try to do a usability test regularly. I would say maybe like once a month, grab someone who's not on your project and just ask them to do certain things. Because I don't think you realize how much time you spend looking at your app or website compared to other people. So something that might be obvious to you might not be obvious to an average user. Don't make me think. Avoid anything that causes like questions as you go through a user journey. Design billboards, not books. You need to make sure that it can be understood at a glance. And get rid of visual noise. Clean up your work. Nice. Any questions? Yeah.
If you absolutely have to give the user some bits of information, what do you think is the best format to do it in? Like text, image, icons? What's the best thing to communicate?
It really depends. If it's something that there is a sort of like well-known convention for that's tied to an icon, like you don't need to explain how saving a file works because you recognize the sort of floppy disk icon. You've seen that before. But if it's sort of a new feature, just having a little bit of text that's properly formatted with like keywords underlined, even if they don't read it the first time around, they might go back and see, oh, okay, that's what I should have been doing, and they can find it more easily. Yeah.
You said at one point that there's like certain formats that lots of websites follow, like having the nav bar at the top.
Mm-hmm.
At what point do you decide to start breaking the norm?
I think, yeah, you can break the norm if you've got an idea that you think is like fun or interesting. But you just have to make sure that when you do that, it's not completely unusable. You still want to, like, if there's anything that can be carried over from the user's typical knowledge from other websites, that's great. Even if you've got like a navbar thing that maybe isn't in the traditional sort of shape, but it generally sort of works the same, that's probably fine. Just you don't want anything that needs instructions, really. Yeah.
How do you run a usability test? Like, what are some of the key guidelines to make sure that you're not kind of creating bias or?
I think it is generally like it's better to have someone that isn't familiar with the products. It depends on what you have written as your sort of primary user journeys. Like obviously for Halason, the primary user journey is buying solar panels, so that's an easy one to go for. So if you've got a well-defined user journey, just getting them to explain what they're doing and what they're thinking at every point is ideal. Make sure you have more sort of concrete objectives in mind for a user to follow, rather than just sort of like use this website, see what you can do, because there's no blockers to doing that. They might just sort of look around for a while, but you can't tell if they're doing better or worse than you might do. Yep.
Have you had a chance to apply any of these principles like in your projects at Theodore? What do you think is the best way to apply them, practically speaking?
That is a very good question. Since I've read this book, I have not been doing any front-end work, so no. But yeah, there's a lot more in the book that goes into different areas of usability. I had to cut out about half of this talk. So if you want a part 2, let me know. Yeah, that's all I got.
You gave Hello Sun as a good example at the beginning. What do you think went right in either the organization or the way that you were doing things at Hello Sun that is maybe or do you see anything that's transposable that we're not doing at Theodo that we could improve on?
I think honestly most of this stuff came up during the design phase, so before we even got to the devs. Most of these usability concerns, there was some stuff that had to be adjusted when we tried things out and realized this isn't quite as obvious as maybe it should be. It might just be when you find the ticket, or it might even be when you're working on it and you actually put it into practice and decide this isn't entirely clear. So it can come up at any sort of point. Just sort of being better educated on these principles and having the rest of your team be aware of it means you can catch it a bit earlier, which means you can write the tickets better.
I think they have Figma designs and mock-ups and stuff, so they were actually doing user testing before it got to the, as in usability testing before it gets to the.
I think so. Yep.
How do you rate the usability of your website?
On my website, I have actually meant to go through that, and unfortunately, I don't think there's really much functionality on it. So, yeah, there's some links that you can click. They seem like they're links, they're underlined in a different color. Yeah.
Do you adjust these rules depending on the user demographic? The Gen Z versus boomers is a different.
I guess so, yeah. I mean, if your typical user is less familiar with technology and using the web, then you would have to maybe include a bit more written instruction to explain what certain parts of the site are doing. So thanks for listening. If you're interested in any design principles like this, please come along to Design Guild every Wednesday at 11 o'clock. And thank you very much.